This is Kelly.
And this is Amy.
And you're listening to Diary of a Death Investigator. This week, we are doing ABC's A Death Investigation. And Amy's like dancing on screen. Well, one day we're going to figure out how you guys can watch this on video. Amy, our video isn't very good, so I'm not sure what it would look like if we just posted it on YouTube or something, but we'll figure it out eventually. One thing at a time. So we're going to do ABCs of Death Investigation. This is going to be part 1. We're going to go A through M, and Amy's going to learn us up on some words.
Oh, yeah.
But also go back. If you've been listening from the beginning of the podcast, you'll hear like repeat words, but kind of like refreshers, because I don't remember everything. You tell us a lot of things.
I do. I teach you a lot of scientific things, Kelly.
I am learning.
So,
yes.
You know what? You're probably better than some of the people that work on scenes.
Also comes in handy when you're watching all these murder shows on Netflix. I just watched, is it American Nightmare? I think that's what it's called. And that's crazy. If you guys haven't watched it, it's a 3-part series on Netflix. It is disappointing. A little intense. Amy didn't finish it. I told her to go back and like watch it, but
I got 5 minutes in and I was like, the boyfriend did it. And I was like, he's so monotone. There's no emotion. So I turned it off.
Well, it turns out the boyfriend didn't do it, but
no, everyone on TikTok told me. So.
Well, and I
know
I'm spoiling it for you. So before I spoil too much, definitely go and listen. And then you can.
I do have to tell you though, what I did watch today. It's something called like Stalkers, Killers, and in light of Valentine's Day, I thought it was very appropriate. It's on Netflix and it got really juicy. The first one is like a love triangle where like this guy dated this chick for 2 weeks and then wanted to move in with this guy and he turned her down. So like she set the ex-wife's house on fire and is like keying everyone's cars and like spray painting like their houses and stuff and like watching him at work, like chick's crazy. So I'm like, wow, this is good.
That's
what I was watching.
It's a Carrie Underwood song.
So, I mean, I like that over monotone boyfriend. So,
well, there's just a lot of them. So anyway, the whole thing is Amy's going to teach us some words that we don't hear every day, but that will, I guess, help us watch crime shows. I did start watching, I was home a couple weeks ago and I started watching The Mentalist.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
It's an old show, but now I'm like hooked. So I need to go back and like start watching some of, Mom and Dad, I think, have it on the whole season downloaded. So I think the first and second episode I watched, now I'm like, oh, now I'm hooked.
I was going to say, yeah, that's one of Dad's shows. That's why you started watching it, huh? Yeah.
All right, Amy, let's get into it.
All right. So this one, you got to kind of say like you're trying to hawk a loogie. So it's like Adipocere. So this one came up in our episode of Body in the Lake. Or maybe was it earlier? So this basically is when the bodies have been in a form of water for a long period of time and the surface of your skin gets this kind of waxy, soapy type of substance on the skin and it makes the skin like really slippery. And so that's basically the easiest way to
like
put it.
Like a fish.
Yeah. You're slimy. And so it's basically just the breaking down of your skin cells. And so the fat comes out of your skin through your pores and it's just going to coat your skin, top layer of your skin. So that's our first one for A. Some of these have a couple words to them, just so you guys know. Our other one that we have for A is autopsy. Now, some offices are going to be different in that not everyone gets a autopsy. A full autopsy is what we say. Now, This is something that we do for everyone that is under the age of 55 if they don't die from something that is deemed natural, or if they don't have like an attending disease. So that is something that is overseen by a doctor, or something that's like a clear cut cause and manner of death. So that just basically means that they weren't like in a car accident where there's a lot of blunt force trauma, or something like a gunshot wound where they could have bled out. So an autopsy would involve everything from us documenting the full external body. So is there anything that would be an identifying feature? So it could just be tattoos or any bruising, any scars. You would document like their eye color, their hair color, their teeth, and their ears, all of those things. You have to take their height, their weight. And
how do you document somebody's ears?
So you want to tell, it's like, are their ears pierced? Is there blood coming out of their ears? Also, something that's interesting that was long believed, and I did mark this. Have you ever seen someone that has a crease in their earlobe?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that used to be associated with heart disease. So, because it had to do with like circulation. So whenever you would see someone with an ear crease, especially one that was a really deep furrow, that was something that doctors would document. So if you have a very deep crease in your ear, that could be a sign of some type of underlying heart condition.
I'm like feeling for my ears right now.
Like
I just thought it was older people.
No. Well, and you think about it too, though, a lot of older people do have heart conditions, right? Or poor circulation. So yeah, that's something that you would document. Other things like you would put, okay, is their nose what we consider intact? Is their nose like broken? Teeth, are they in poor condition, good condition? Eyes, you always put like the size of their pupils, because, if someone has had a stroke, their pupils might be dilated, or if there's a sign of drugs, things like that. Those are very important. So things that we also take during autopsies, during every autopsy, whether it's a viewing autopsy where we don't open up someone, we always take toxicology, and the type of toxicology can be different per each case. So during an autopsy, a full one, we will always open them up, a Y incision, and they take out every organ, and organs get weighed and cut, and bowels are opened up, and you'll take whatever type of food or whatever is inside the intestines or bowels for being tested to see what they've eaten.
I have a question.
Okay.
About food. So there's these TikToks going around of McDonald's hamburgers that have been sitting out for a long time. They say years and years. So have you ever seen a piece of food that like you could easily tell what it was other than like corn?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I was just going to say, I would have doctors that would straight up put McDonald's French fries, because you can tell exactly what type of fry they are. Your Taco Bell lady.
Wait, did you ever hear Taco Bell in there?
No, but like you could tell.
I'm safe.
Like, because it takes at least 6 hours for that to hit like a digestive point. Like you can tell when someone's eaten last, because it can take like 12 hours for your food to digest completely. And so like if it would have only been 4 hours, that food's not going to digest. So
they would know just because of the smell. It smells like Taco Bell. It does. It doesn't matter what way. It always smells the same.
Or like Chick-fil-A, it has a certain smell. So, I can remember specifically like one time a doctor put like a certain type of like refried beans, McDonald's French fries. Yeah, literally, because they were like that small certain shape of French fry. And it was like a teenage kid. Yeah, I can remember specific foods like watching during an autopsy. Yeah, for sure. And like even like certain overdose cases, because sometimes when those people overdose, they'll throw up before they die. And so like you can still see like the types of pills and some of the food that they had as well. And so, yeah, you can still see like some of what they've eaten. So yeah, it's actually a really good question. You can tell. And everyone thinks that you'll poop yourself and pee yourself when you die. That's not always the situation. Like you don't always just excrete like everything. And so no, it depends on where everything is in your system and your body at the time of your death. And like, if you even have like, that's why we take like urine from your bladder. I mean, how else would we be able to put a syringe in your body and withdraw urine?
One last question before we move on to the bees.
Yeah.
What about like parasites and or like tapeworms or roundworms, or do you see those?
Well, yeah, Kelly, whatever's living in your body, you're going to find that.
I know, but I didn't know how common it is because I'm like...
So something like that is a parasite, right? It lives off of something else that's living. Okay, so it's going to exit a body if it's no longer benefiting from whatever it's living in, right?
Ooh, that's like a horror movie.
Well, it's life, okay? So, biology, okay?
Biology.
So, that's how that works. So, they'll figure out what's in your system regardless, whether it be through toxicology or just physically seeing it by pulling it out of your body. So, and they can see like perforations in your bowels and all that stuff too, because they literally will go through your entire intestine. They'll pull it out and go through it meticulously. So
lovely.
You can't hide anything in your body. So yeah, that's autopsy. All right, moving on to the bees. So blood spatter. Blood spatter, it's not in every death, right? But it's very important, especially to scenes that... And it's not just homicides or suicides. You have some that are natural that can be very misleading. So if you have someone, that has a gastrointestinal bleed, these are stinky, and sometimes they can come out through the mouth and sometimes they can come out through the other end, and they're very, very dark. They have what we call like coffee emiscence. So it's like dark and it's like, looks like coffee grounds. And sometimes it can come out first kind of like blood, and they can like cough it. And so you'll see like stuff like spattered. And I remember one of my colleagues having a scene that was very, very bloody, and it looked like a homicide because this person was having a gastrointestinal bleed that was rectal, and it was so bad they couldn't get off the ground. They were crawling around and they were trying to get up. And so as they were crawling around the floor, they were getting up to the walls. And when they were getting up to the walls, their hands were just streaking down the sides of the walls. So it just looked like a bloody crime scene, right? So it turns out, though, that it was a complete natural cause of death. They just were bleeding out from the inside naturally. So, but blood spatter can also be gunshot wound. You can have something that follows through from a projectile exiting, and it can give you a trajectory angle, or someone being slit from the neck and you have like an arterial spurt, which is from your blood pumping from your neck. So arterial spurt. So, or blood spatter coming off of like an implement that is used for like a blunt force trauma or from stabbing. So blood that would be coming off of that object. So blood spatter, B.
It's important though.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. And especially like for CSI, like they will mark literally every little piece of blood at a scene. and it's a lot of work for them. So I feel bad for them for sure. Okay, so C, so coagulation. This is something that happens to blood when it has exited our body and it's been sitting there for a long time. So it definitely depends on if it's like been dripping into like a puddle. And it looks kind of weird if it kind of almost looks like a blood jello, if that makes sense. And it's really thick, and it doesn't ever fully, I wouldn't say
Solidify?
Yeah, it's just really thick. And
like a soup, like a thick soup, like a tomato soup or like some sort of like puree.
Yeah, it looks kind of gross. And then in our blood, we have this serum that's clear. And so that will also start separating away from the blood. So then you'll kind of see like this coagulated blood. And then you'll see like this clear serum that kind of starts leaking away from like this puddle. So yeah, that looks kind of weird. And cause of death. So there's a difference here between cause and manner. So cause of death is basically going to be the thing that leads to like their ultimate demise. So like when we've talked about like say like blunt force trauma, that would be something that we would consider a cause of death. So like say like stabbing. So it'd be like it'd be like exsanguination due to stabbing. So exsanguination is like a bleeding out, so a loss of blood. So cause of death would be like exsanguination. And then when we get down to manner of death, that would be like, it could be homicide or suicide. So, and then coroner is different from medical examiner. They're the ones that are elected in, and it depends. It goes by county. So they work for like a sheriff's office. And we talked about that a lot in our first episode. Coroners are elected in, and then they're going to have a deputy coroner. But coroners are not going to be physicians. They don't have any necessarily education per se as a doctor. And they can sign off on a report. And so we've said before that this can be a biased opinion because they're working in law enforcement. And sometimes in small places, coroners can actually also be like a funeral director. So it's not always a good thing for someone to double as, wear two hats in the same place, because they can sign off something as an accident or a natural death just so that they can get business as like the funeral director for a case. So yeah, not necessarily a good thing. So those are the C's. So moving on to D's. So I think it was our second episode where we were introduced to both of these things. And I think it pretty much grossed Kelly out.
No, it definitely grossed me out.
And a lot of other people, I heard. So decomps, those are aplenty here in this area. You get a lot of them specifically in areas where it's very humid. And this happens a lot, typically when people just haven't been found in a long time. Decomposition always happens in the lower right side of the abdomen. And this is because that's just where a lot of your bacteria sits in your body. So bacteria just helps break down your body. And then you start having all these gases build up in your body as well, because that's just how your body breaks down.
So the more bacteria you have in your body, the faster your body breaks down?
Essentially, that would be like the theory, but it's also due to kind of the environment that you're in as well. If you're in a preserved environment where it's colder, and like say your house, and your house is cold, and say you're clothed, you're probably going to break down a little bit slower.
Oh, I break down super slow in my house. It's so cold.
Well, say you're somewhere that's freezing and it's snow and ice, you'd probably be preserved pretty well. So, A lot of it has to do with your conditions. So if you're hot, it's humid, you're going to go faster. It's going to speed up that process. So a lot of it has to do with the clothing you're wearing, the temperature. Yeah, just your environment. That has a lot to do with it as well. Also kind of if insects have access to you as well. If you have any openings that they can get to.
Orifices.
Yeah, orifices. We're not on O yet, Kelly. Yeah. Don't worry, we'll get there. So, yeah, decomposition. Like I said, you start bloating and you start breaking down. So basically, you'll see big O tummies. And it really doesn't matter how big you are to start with. You'll just start getting bigger in the stomach. And really, everything starts getting bigger, even your face. It's really weird. It distorts everything. And you'll get green. And we have what's called marbling. So marbling of the skin, it looks weird because like all the veins and the body kind of look green over like this white skin. It's a whole process. I remember one time, I don't know if I should admit to this, we never had very many big bags because the bigger bags that we put bodies in, they were more expensive and our office just would not pay for them. And so a lot of the bags we had were cheap, like the handles on them would break. And if we had a body that was already 300 pounds and you're trying to put this person in there that's decomp, like the bags wouldn't even close. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you have to pull this person downstairs in this apartment complex. I was like, I'm annoyed. It's hot. This person smells terrible. Like it's a hoarder house. The whole situation's bad and the bag wouldn't close and your whole body's covered now in this person. I remember one time I was with one of my bosses and he slipped and busted it in this guy's juices. Yeah. And like, I think I've told you before, like I've had it seep through a pair of my boots, through my socks to my feet. Yeah, threw those boots away. Yeah, I mean, you're just like annoyed with the whole situation. So I was like, literally, I knew that this guy could pop easily. And so I looked around and I found a fork and I just stuck it through a part in his skin that was thin and it deflated him. It smelled terrible, but I'm like, hey, I can get the bag closed now. So,
wait, oh gosh, I don't know here. Yeah, that's terrible.
I mean, we were going to open him up in autopsy anyways.
Wait, but did anything squirt out other than air?
No, it was literally all just gas.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. That's all it was. It was just gas that was building up. So, yep. So that's decomp. But leading into that is sometimes they deglove. So degloving happens also in the process of decomposition, and degloving is...
This is like crazy to me.
Yeah, is when the top layer skin just slides off. Really, it can slide off any part of your body during the process of decomposition. And so we talked about that in the second episode of Mr. December, because that happened to me and my transport, and we got juice all over us.
Yeah, but talk about why degloving is important, because that wasn't originally why you had told me about degloving. You had told me about degloving because you guys use it for fingerprinting.
Yeah, so degloving is actually really awesome with hands because we are responsible for identifying people who really, once they get to the point of decomposition, they aren't recognizable. And so we have to identify them. And our first route of identifying them is through fingerprints. So we do this by degloving their hands. And so we put on a pair of gloves, so sterile gloves, and then we basically take off their top layer of skin off their hands. Sometimes we have to do this with like a scalpel. If we can't get their whole first layer off their hand, sometimes we'll just take off like their fingers or just the fingertips, because we have to be very careful if it's not ready to slide off. We don't want to rip that fingertip because then you lose like that, you lose that print. And so, yeah, then you take that and then you just slide it over your own hand and then you ink that fingerprint and then you just put it onto a ink card.
I don't know if you can tell, but I'm making a face. I just had Botox done a week ago, so I don't know if my facial expressions are showing.
It's more in your mouth area. It's just the bitter, like you just tasted something very bitter.
That's so I think it's really cool, but it's also like really gross. It's creative, I guess, in a way. I mean,
well, fingerprinting was like one of my favorite things to do. I actually really liked that because like we got to do a lot of stuff with that because like if you couldn't deglove their hands and you took pictures of them, or you could rehydrate hands when they got mummified, or you could soak their fingers and then you could roll their fingerprints. So yeah, it's science, Kelly.
Which leads right into E for evidence.
Yeah, well, evidence really, there's a fine point, which was what we would collect on scenes and then what like CSI would collect, because we didn't always have CSI on scene. But I know we had certain cases where there was a lot of drugs on scene, and sometimes you'd be looking at someone and they had all of maybe 4 teeth in their mouth, and you would ask them, so do they have a history of drug abuse? And they're like, nope. And I'm like, okay, well, am I going to find any drugs in the house? Nope. And I'm like, well, why don't you just tell me now, because I'm going to find it in there. And they're like, oh, there's nothing in there. And I'm like, you just make my life a lot easier if you just tell me. So sure enough, I'd always find their pipe or whatever else was in there. So, and then of course, whoever it was that passed away, they always had like dentures or something. They were like 50, and I'd come out and I'd be like, so this isn't your pipe? Oh my gosh, no, that wasn't mine. And I'm like, I'm not trying to get you in trouble. I just want you to tell me the truth so it will help your loved one or whatever. Like, we're going to do toxicology, so we're going to find out anyways. But the more honest you are, like, it just helps us in the long run. So it's like that kind of stuff. Or like, you know, when like fentanyl was like a big deal, like I need to know because I don't want to wear a whole Tyvek suit inside this house. And
oh yeah, because you can't breathe it in.
And so in some trailer that has no air conditioning when it's 110 outside. Yeah, like that kind of stuff. So that's when we would collect evidence on scenes. Now in the lab, we would collect evidence that would be directly off of people, which would be like anything biological. So we would take all the swabs of every orifice, which was not my favorite because someone would always magically have to go to the bathroom when it was time to swab someone's
booty hole.
Yes. And it would make me so mad. I'm like, you guys, I always have to do this. And I'm just like, it takes 2 seconds, but I would have to stop what I was doing to come do that. So,
because you're so good at it, I guess.
Because everyone else was so immature and always made it like some immature thing. And I'm like, and you could tell it made some doctors really upset when someone like made a comment. And I'm like, I'll just do it. And so, yeah, I'm just like, yeah, there's going to be poop on it because, yeah, it's where poop comes out. Okay. Like, that's just how it is.
You better hope that it's at least poop and not something else.
Well, sometimes there was other things up there, okay? So, yeah, you had to collect, hair and fingernails, all that stuff, and clothes. So if it was like winter time and someone's wearing 3 layers and they got shot up, not only were you collecting all the bullets, but like, and not just, the swabs, same thing. We had this, it was like our most, oh my gosh, she was like Mother Teresa doctor. And everything had to be done in a very specific way. And it was a Saturday, so low staff. And there again, no one wanted to be mature. This guy, he was a gang member. He was shot in his car Well, it went through the car door, through his hip, and it just so happened to stop in a certain body part.
His appendage.
Yes, and no one wanted to cut it out. Nobody. The doctor didn't even want to do it. And I was like, are you guys kidding me right now? So you know who did it? Me.
You.
Yeah.
And now you're telling us this, retelling the story.
Yeah.
For
And it was
entertainment
like
value.
a 45. It was like a 45 caliber. It was huge.
Well, it should have
So I
been
was
easy to cut
like-
out then.
It was. I was like, see, you guys are making this all a big deal. And I'm like, what would you all have done if I wasn't here today? You'd all be just sitting here staring at each other. Like, I don't know, playing rock, paper, scissors, figure out who's going to do this. So, yeah. That's evidence. Well, we would collect it, and then you had to put like stickers on it. You would have to seal it and sign it, and then law enforcement would show up, and then you'd have to release it to them. Like, no one wanted to collect evidence. It was such a big deal. Like, no one wanted to, especially when you had days where you'd have like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 homicides, and you were tired from coming off a shift that was like a 24-hour shift, and you were busy, and you were just like, you feel like you got hit by a bus, and you were running around like a crazy person. So, yeah, it wasn't always fun. So the other thing that we have for E is entomology. So it's basically studying anything with bugs, and especially like bugs that help in the process of decomposition. So sometimes this is actually pretty interesting because you have bugs that are not just flies, of course. You're always going to have flies with death, and flies will go into any hole that they can find. And that can also be like any type of injury. But you have other bugs like beetles that are like boring bugs. So they will make other holes in the body that can sometimes be confusing. So we were talking about that in like Mr. December, where he had like those 22 bullet wounds in his face. And so we had multiple holes in his face. And so like that actually made it really hard to kind of distinguish that. And so sometimes you have that where they can create more, not necessarily injuries, and sometimes you can tell when it's like difference between postmortem and antemortem because of like the color of the damage to the skin. And then something else are like wasps and bees because they really like the sweet smell of blood. And especially when someone has been drinking a lot, they really like the smell of like alcohol.
It's probably the sugar content because alcohol has sugar and they like the sugar.
Yes. So they will always be buzzing around bodies, especially when it's outside. Car accidents, for sure. Those were the ones that were big ones during the summer. It'd be like out in a field or something. A drunk driver would be out in a field, and there would always be wasps and bees hovering around. So entomology can actually tell you a lot of things. I remember someone in our other office in the state, she did like this whole project where we would recover maggots for her, and she was studying like maggot activity on bodies. There's a lot you can tell from bug activity on bodies. Really interesting. On F now, forensics. Man, forensics studies like a whole gambit of things. Not just what you do in the field, but what you can also do in an office. And really, it can be like forensics interviewing forensic nurses who do like rape kits. Forensic odontology, which is something we're going to talk about later, not just forensic pathologists, but CSI, because everyone thinks forensics is just CSI, and it's so much more than that. It's all these people in labs that do DNA, and you have ballistics, and I mean, it's grown so much.
When we talked a lot about forensics, because especially during like the Green River Killer, right? So before forensics, we were talking about how there were all these serial killers before, and they didn't have any way to track them. And so especially people, because we were saying that like prostitutes were a big target because they didn't have anybody, right? Or runaways, nobody looking for them. So we even mentioned like in the second part of the Green River Killer, and maybe the first part, but they're still finding bodies. And that's because they didn't have DNA testing. So when did when did forensics really take off? Was it early 2000s?
90s.
In the 90s?
I'd say 90s because that's when DNA started. And really from there, because that's kind of when like computers got better.
Oh, that's true. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, that's when technology kind of got better. And then from there, think of like the internet, right? So that's kind of when everything kind of exploded. And then I would say 2000s, it really picked up. I mean, you can even think about like archaeology. You think about an archaeologist, you think of like Indiana Jones, right? But like an archaeologist now, they play such a big role in identifying bodies. So like, look at what they're doing, like in the Green River Killer case, like identifying like people now that are probably buried, that are just bones. So, and now like you're lucky to have one in an office now for a medical examiner because gosh, I don't know how many times I've been called out somewhere like this hunter was out here somewhere and they found these bones. Well, I don't hunt. I don't know the difference between deer femur and like, I mean, honestly, they look very similar to like a human femur. And so it's really important to have like those kinds of people. So,
well, we talked about that a little bit. So there is a podcast called Death Calls Podcast, and she I think goes around, she studied bones. And so, and I might be saying all of this wrong, but I think she's a bone specialist. And so she now teaches people the difference in bones, right? And between animal and human bones. So she's saying how much time it saves because, you know, they will be able to tell that, you know, law enforcement will be able to tell the difference then if she trains them on how to do it. Yeah. So super important. I am going to cut us off at F because you learned us up real good this episode.
Told you I could go.
I know. At first I told Amy, hey, like, I'm not sure that, you know, we'll have enough information to do this, but I want to make sure that
you shall receive.
Yeah. I want to make sure that we do the ABCs justice because I think there's a lot of information and there's a lot of ways to apply it. So we'll go ahead, and I originally had thought maybe this would be a 2-parter, but it could even be a 4-parter. So,
ooh.
Yeah. It just depends on how much information Amy has. And so I really think that this is important. So
the next one will be like, I'm done 5 minutes later.
But she has some good ones. So as always, if you guys have any questions, you can email us at kelly@diaryofadeathinvestigator.com. You can message us on our Instagram page, Diary of a Death Investigator. And until next time,
toodles magoodles.